it's begun in earnest. The Democrats and their media sycophants are in full gaslight mode, and they're trying to recreate Kamala Harris for about the 47th time. Okay, today I want to cover 5 areas. Number 1, immigration. Number 2, the economy. Number 3, freedom. Number 4, the Supreme Court. And number 5, the new VP pick. They're out in full force, calling her a powerhouse, the next Barack Obama, and the perfect candidate to bring our country together. Some pundits are actually saying they fell in love with her. The same pundits, by the way, that last fall called her a feckless incompetent and wanted to take her off the ballot instead of Joe.
Last year, party kingmakers tried peeling her off the ticket. The headlines were everywhere. Democrats shouldn't ditch Joe Biden. They should replace Kamala Harris. The case for Biden to drop Kamala Harris. For the country's sake, Vice President Harris should step aside.
Now Joe is the loser and Kamala is the savior of democracy. These people are sick. I think we should pass a law where they're not allowed to use the word news anymore on their networks or newspapers. Well, let's see what this moderate savior says about herself. She's for banning all fossil fuels in the United States. She supports wanting every worker in the country to have to join a union, whether you want to or not. She supports convicted murderers and rapists being able to vote while they're in prison. She thinks American taxpayers should pay for sex change operations for prisoners. She supports forcing all Americans to buy electric cars whether they want to or not. She supports defunding the police.
Defund the police. The issue behind it is that we need to reimagine how we are creating safety. For too long, the status quo thinking has been you get more safety by putting more cops on the street. Well, that's wrong.
What?
She's on video talking about young people being afraid to have children because of climate change. The climate change hoax that she's been perpetrating on them her whole political career.
Young leaders talk with me about a term they've coined called climate anxiety, right? Which is fear of the future and the unknown, of whether it makes sense for you to even think about having children.
She also favors population reduction, so the rest of everybody that's left can breathe cleaner air and live better lives. So it sounds like this moderate is for phasing out human beings completely. And that's what's going to happen if she gets her way. All I can say is, Kamala, you first. Elon Musk actually called her an extinctionist. She wants to eliminate your private health care, so everybody in the United States has to be on government health care.
You support the Medicare for All bill, I think initially co-sponsored by Senator Bernie Sanders. You're also a co-sponsor on it. I believe it will totally eliminate private insurance. So for people out there who like their insurance, they don't get to keep it?
Well, listen, the idea is that everyone gets access to medical care. And you don't have to go through the process of going through an insurance company, having them give you approval, going through the paperwork, all of the delay that may require. Who of us has not had that situation where you got to wait for approval and the doctor says, well, I don't know if your insurance company is going to cover this? Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on.
Let's ask England and Canada how that's working out.
The latest Ontario health data shows the average wait time in ERs was 20 hours before the patient got a bed. People across the country are dealing with record-level wait times when trying to access healthcare services. From emergency rooms to surgical queues, there's a backlog of patients, and things will get a lot worse, according to the head of the Canadian Medical Association. That the healthcare system is collapsing around us. What do you mean by that? I mean, what does collapse look like right now at the front lines of healthcare?
What I think it means is that Canadians aren't getting health care. It's really as simple as that. Our emergency departments are overwhelmed. We've got people waiting sometimes, 18, 24 hours to be seen. Elders sitting on gurneys for days waiting to be admitted to hospital. We're short-staffed. We can't actually get people care. We've got growing backlogs. This means real people waiting sometimes years to have essential surgeries, things that allow them to go to work, be around their families. And then in the backdrop, primary care falling apart even worse than before.
She supports open borders and eliminating ICE.
The signs at the rally you just held were people standing there saying, abolish ICE.
Yeah.
Is that a position that you agree with?
Listen, I think there's no question that we've got to critically re-examine ICE and its role and the way that it is being administered and the work it is doing, and we need to probably think about starting from scratch.
That's the Immigration and Customs Enforcement law enforcement agency for the United States. They're the people who go get the illegal criminals and put them in jail or send them back home. She says she wants to decriminalize crossing the border. So that means no more illegal immigration. She claims that most illegals are peaceful and hard-working people who just want a better life for their family. So let's see how we've fared with those 15 million peaceful illegal immigrants that Kamala Harris has let into our country over the last 3.5 years. Well, I can tell you this, it's resulted in some of the most heinous murders, rapes, and criminal assaults in our criminal justice system. And do you think this protector of the people, this harbinger of women's rights, has ever called any of the American citizens who were killed, raped, kidnapped, or beaten by these peaceful illegals? Did she call Rachel Morin's family? Did she call Laken Riley's family? Did she call Jocelyn Ungare's family? Did she call the family of the 13-year-old girl who was kidnapped and raped in Central Park in New York in the middle of the afternoon? Did she call any of them? Not one. But you know who did? Donald Trump did. And he wasn't the vice president. He wasn't the president. But he called each and every one of those families and even invited some of them to come to his rallies to discuss their loved ones that they had lost because of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. They are directly responsible for the deaths of those young women and many more, by the way. Oh, it gets even better. Her Department of Homeland Security, which is a joke, actually released almost 100 terrorists. These were people on the terrorist watch list that were already arrested by the Border Patrol. And her Department of Justice, I don't even know what justice means anymore, let them go. 100 known terrorists. What kind of person would even consider something like that if she was concerned about her country's security and the people of America? She has created the worst national security situation in American history. She's importing terrorists. You want more? This defender of women's rights also supports having boys play against girls in sports. And she's talking the high school and junior high school level is okay. So think about this for a minute. She thinks it's perfectly fine for a 12-year-old boy pretending to be a girl watching your daughters undress in the locker room at school and forcing them to watch him undress. And never mind the kids, she supports grown men wearing a dress and 5 days growth going into the public bathroom right after your 12-year-old at the movies. And if you don't like it, you're the problem. So let's talk crime. So the Democrats have been out in force in the last few months telling us how crime has just plummeted in the country. And of course all their media toadies jump right in and bow to them. So Kamala, of course, will fail to mention that all her progressive DAs around the country have actually eliminated hundreds, if not thousands, of felonies and reduced them to misdemeanors. You think that's bad? Some of our largest, of course, Democrat cities around the country don't even send their crime statistics to the FBI anymore. So they're not counted. And that includes New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. I mean, some of the biggest cities in this country, the Democratic rulers in those cities won't even tell the country what their crime stats are.
Law enforcement agencies nationwide did not submit any data to its newly revised crime statistic collection service in 2021, creating huge gaps in national crime stats. Without the numbers, the FBI cannot analyze crime effectively.
So of course, when the FBI puts out the figures without any of these big cities' numbers, it looks like crime is going down. But that's a lie. So as I've said before, and I'll probably say 1,000 more times, these people are despicable. They're actually working to denigrate our society, our quality of life, and destroy our institutions all throughout the country. Now on the economy, it gets even worse. She wants to eliminate the Trump tax cuts. Those tax cuts help 91% of the entire country's taxpayers, not just the millionaires and billionaires that they keep talking about. I'm not either of those things. And we got a giant tax cut when Trump passed that tax bill. And I'm guessing you did too. She also supports rent control nationwide. She wants landlords to charge, I guess, what she thinks they should charge for their properties, the properties they paid for and pay taxes on every year. She thinks she should set the amount they can raise the rent. She was also the sponsor of a bill that would have spent almost $2 trillion on the Green New Deal climate hoax. Did you know she was the deciding vote on the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan? Did you get rescued? Yeah, neither did I. And do you know who got rescued? All of her millionaires and billionaires. Not you and me. The giant corporations that make solar panels and windmills got billions of dollars in government subsidies. And also, hundreds of these so-called environmental groups got tens of billions of dollars from the federal government. And to this day, I have no idea what these people do or have ever done to bring down the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. My guess is they're kicking it back on the beach in the Bahamas with some sort of drink that has an umbrella in it, on our tax dime. And now our stock market is going nuts. We lost over $1 trillion of valuations just in 2 days on your 401k, by the way. Now it's bounced up a little and bounced back and then bounced up and now it bounced down again. This is Bidenomics, folks. Hope you're enjoying it. I'm sure you'll remember her fondly when you have to work 5 more years before you can retire. So, as I mentioned, she wants to let the Trump tax cuts expire. The tax cuts that help 91% of the country. So now, in addition to the massive inflation she caused that made everything you buy more expensive, your food, your gas, your rent, now she wants to take even more of what little money you have left. Now, don't you love that her new campaign is called Freedom? So, of course, she's all for freedom. Her freedom to take away your guns, take away your private health insurance, eliminate your air conditioning, your gas-powered stove, and your ceiling fan. She even wants to eliminate all fossil fuel vehicles in the country. Are you ready for our solar-powered airplanes and cruise ships? Hey, military, what do you think about solar-powered tanks? And you guys in the Navy, you're not getting left out. Those solar-powered submarines are going to be just great, aren't they? And don't forget, she also wants to eliminate your gas or coal barbecue. And, by the way, the meat you would like to cook on it. And this freedom-loving candidate jailed 1,500 plus black men for smoking pot when she was the Attorney General of California. And then she had the gall to go on a morning talk show with Charlemagne the Fraud and laugh about smoking pot herself. The very thing she put them in jail for.
Have you ever smoked?
I have.
Okay. Like in
And
college,
I inhale. I did inhale.
Okay.
It was a long time ago. But yes.
I know you have to go. They say you have to go. I just wanted to
I
ask.
just broke news.
I mean, was it in college? See, I like stuff like that. That's a real honest answer.
Real.
Was it a blunt or joint?
It was a joint.
Hey.
Yeah.
You remember the high?
I do.
So if it was legalized all throughout the country and medicinal, would you do it?
Listen,
again?
I think that it gives a lot of people joy, and we need more joy.
We need more joy in this world.
How do you think those people feel, Kamala and their families? And she also withheld evidence as Attorney General that would have freed an innocent man until the courts actually forced her to cough it up. And she kept people in jail past their sentences so they could be used for cheap labor for the state of California, mostly firefighters, I believe. And I'm not making that up. You can Google it in about 5 seconds. She also supported keeping all the January 6 defendants in jail for months, some even years, without a trial or any due process. She was happy to put your grandma from Wichita, Kansas in jail for basically trespassing, while she fully supports letting violent criminals out of jail and back on the streets just to commit another violent crime. She even demanded that every American citizen take the COVID jab, whether they were at risk or not, or wanted it or not. So this is your harbinger of democracy? This is your freedom candidate? Yeah, I don't think so. She's such a defender of democracy, she was willing to set aside 14.5 million votes from Democrat voters who voted for Joe Biden in the primaries just so she could step in to the candidate for president of the United States after not receiving one single vote for president from anybody in this country. She also opposes any laws making you prove you're an American citizen before you can vote. There's only one conclusion you can come to when someone opposes showing an ID when you vote to prove that you're a citizen. It's that she wants people to vote who are not eligible. This brings the whole immigration thing back into focus. Now think about this. She let 15 million plus illegals into this country in the last 3.5 years and did nothing. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't incompetence. This was part of the plan. They want these people to become Democrat voters. There's simply no other conclusion you can come to. As if that wasn't bad enough, she supports legalizing every single illegal immigrant in the country and putting him on a path to citizenship. In other words, creating millions and millions of new Democrat voters, as I mentioned earlier. And these people never went through one process to become an American resident, let alone an American citizen. And this doesn't even make sense politically. Every single poll shows a majority of U.S. citizens, including legal immigrants, support mass deportations of all illegals. And it doesn't even matter how long you've been here, if you married somebody 10 years ago, or even a DACA recipient. The vast majority of the American people want those people to go home. She also wants to eliminate the Electoral College.
Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, had a town hall last night, and she said that she thinks we should do away with the Electoral College. Is that, do you agree with that?
I think that I'm open to the discussion. I mean, there's no question that the popular vote has been diminished in terms of making the final decision about who's the president of the United States, and we need to deal with that. So I'm open to the discussion.
The Electoral College was established in the Constitution specifically to make the vote more democratic. If we went down to just a majority vote in each state, that means that the three largest states in the country, California, New York, and I think number 3 is Illinois, they would pick presidents for the foreseeable future, leaving out the other 47 states. That's democracy? And finally, for now anyway, she supports the DNC lawsuits against JFK Jr. in almost every state to keep him off the ballot. That's your defender of democracy, folks. She's not only a defender of democracy, she tries to undermine it at every turn. Nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted this woman to be president. She never got above 3% in the polls when she ran in 2020. She came in 3rd in her own home state of California. She dropped out before the very first primary, so she literally never got one person to vote for her for president in the entire country. So what that means is when Kamala Harris ran for president in 2020, she got exactly the same amount of votes and delegates that you did and I did. Congratulations. So let's talk Supreme Court. Kamala Harris supports packing the Supreme Court. Not only does she support packing the court, which means adding 3, 4, 6, 10, 27 new justices to the court, guess who puts those justices on the court? Well, it's the President of the United States. And guess who gets to be president if she's elected in November? Kamala Harris. So basically, we would have a liberal Supreme Court in perpetuity for the rest of our history in the United States. If that's not enough, she now supports term limits for Supreme Court justices. 18 years, I believe, is the amount of years they've picked. Well, guess who's on the Supreme Court right now that has been on longer than 18 years? The 2 most conservative justices on the court. What a shocker. This has nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with ethics. This is about raw political power, period. Democrats have been using the courts for decades to get positions passed that the American people just won't vote for. So now they're pissed off that they're not getting the rulings they want, because the ex-majority leader, Harry Reid, wanted to change the rules to get circuit court judges passed and appointed. So he knocked out the filibuster for circuit court judges because he was pissed off that Republicans had been filibustering some of his nominees.
It's time to change the Senate before this institution becomes obsolete.
And Republicans argue will make Washington gridlock worse.
It puts a chill on the entire United States Senate.
Senate Democrats voted to lower the threshold to break a filibuster from 60 votes to 51 votes, a simple majority. It strips the minority party's ability to block a president's nominees. It's called the nuclear option for good reason.
So by changing the rules, it meant that the Senate could nominate and confirm circuit court judges by a simple majority. Again, the party of democracy changes the rules when they don't like the way the game is going. They were absolutely certain that Hillary Clinton was going to be president, so she'd be able to pack the Supreme Court with liberals because several of them were ready to retire. They never think about what comes next. Well, you know what came next? Donald Trump as president and the Republicans taking the majority in the Senate. So since Democrats had eliminated the filibuster for circuit court judges, the Republicans popped up and said, hey, hold my beer. They eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court justices. And because of the Democrats, Donald Trump was able to put 3 justices on the court. So now, because of their undemocratic stupidity, they want to change the court to ensure a liberal majority forever. Again, the party of democracy, the protectors of the Constitution, want to change the Constitution so they can get more political power. And Kamala Harris is all in. Now, fortunately for us, it's almost impossible to do. Matter of fact, I would say it was impossible. It would take a constitutional amendment to change the setup of the Supreme Court, and there's not a chance in hell they're going to get that done. To get that done, they would have to have 2/3 of the Congress and 2/3 of the Senate pass that bill. Then it has to go out to the states, and it takes 75% of the states to ratify that bill. In other words, 3/4. Unfortunately for them right now, the Republicans control the House. And, by the way, it would take 38 states, and Republicans now control more than half, I believe, of all the state houses. Good luck with that. But let's just say that the Democrats take back the House and the Senate. No party has held 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate since FDR. So basically this is going nowhere. And I don't think it's ever going to go anywhere. Kamala Harris just wants to make this a campaign issue. Truthfully, even she knows this is not going anywhere. But as we all know, the truth is really not something she puts a lot of stock in. She wouldn't recognize the truth if it bit her in the ass and held on for half an hour. So just for fun, let's just say they got 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, and they passed the resolution for a constitutional amendment. That would be scary. But let's just say they did. As I mentioned, it would take 38 states, I believe, would be 75%, to ratify the amendment, and that can take decades. The best recent example of that is the Equal Rights Amendment. That was actually passed by the House and the Senate. It went out to the states, and it lingered there for, I think, almost 20 years, maybe even more. And then guess what? It failed. But again, just for fun, let's assume they got it done. But with the Democrats' luck, and the ultimate irony would be after this bill gets ratified by more than 3/4 of the states, after that 10 to 20 years, what happens if the current administration is a conservative one? Now conservatives would get to name those 3, 6, 10, 37, whatever it is, Supreme Court justices, basically guaranteeing a conservative court for the rest of our history in the United States. Can you imagine? You better get those hazmat suits out, because what you're going to hear if that happens is 100 million Democrats simultaneously shitting themselves. And how many minutes, no, how many seconds do you think it would take before Democrats were all over TV saying how it's unconstitutional to change the Constitution. Although I don't really agree with changing the Supreme Court at all, but if that scenario happened, I have to admit, this is the conservatives' fever dream. I'd literally be dancing in the streets if it came down that way. Of course, if it happened when Democrats were in office, we'd be screwed forever. So let's just leave that one alone. So now Kamala Harris has made her VP pick. And as always with the party of diversity, she picked an old white guy. And not just an old white guy. She picked an old white guy that believes in all the same lunatic policies that she does. I'll get to him more in future episodes. So, in another testament to her inexplicable political instincts, she had a chance here to have her sister soldier moment and tell the radical far left and her Hamas supporters that they're not going to control her. But again, she couldn't. This just shows her amazing ability to make the wrong decisions about almost everything. So normally, presidential candidates usually pick a vice president based on the state they need help in. Okay, Minnesota has been bluer than blue forever. This guy can't help her with anything because she's already going to win that state no matter what. Everybody thought she was going to pick Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, because he seemed like a pretty moderate guy. He's amazingly popular, and Pennsylvania for her is a must-win state. If she doesn't win Pennsylvania, she's not the president, period. But you know what's really tragic? And let's just be honest about this. She couldn't pick him. And do you know why she couldn't pick him? Because he's a Jew. The Hamas wing and the Hezbollah wing of her party, and there are many, would simply not vote for her if she put a Jewish man on the ticket. She would almost certainly lose Michigan and maybe even lose Minnesota for the first time for a Democrat in nobody knows how long. It's disgraceful. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The current Democrat Party is the most racist, misogynist, anti-Semitic, and anti-family party we've ever had in this country, with the possible exception of the Confederacy. And even with that, the Confederacy would take her on the racism, but she beats them hands down on all the other stuff. And of course, she's all in on the identity politics, and when it comes to identity politics, Democrats tell us nothing more than they tell us that we have to vote for a woman for president. But how can we believe them when the same people who are telling us we have to vote for a woman don't know what a woman is? Huh? The bottom line is that this woman should never get anywhere near the White House. Now, what that means to us is that conservatives have to get out and actually vote. We can't sit around bitching and moaning about all the policies we hate and then not vote. So those of us living in a mail-in ballot state need to fill out that ballot as soon as we get it. They can't cheat if your ballot's already in. Now, those of you who don't live in an all mail-in ballot state but have early voting need to vote early. This idea that Republicans have been spouting for, decades, that the real American votes on Election Day, that's ridiculous. So what happens on Election Day if you're having a major rainstorm, a hurricane, a blizzard? And what if you get to the polling place and the voting machines are mysteriously having a software glitch, or they're just down? Don't laugh at this. We've lost more than one election just because of these very things. The one that comes to mind first is actually the New York gubernatorial race where Lee Zeldin was running against Kathy Hochul. Lee Zeldin only lost by a couple of points here. And you know why? Because Republicans were coming out to vote on Election Day and there was a major snowstorm. So the turnout was non-existent. If those Republicans in New York had turned in their mail-in ballots or voted early, Lee Zeldin would be the governor of New York. And you know what? His first promise was to fire Alvin Bragg in New York City. That means there never would have been a Trump trial with 34 fake felonies. Think about that. So whatever area you're in, a mail-in area or an early voting area, vote early. It's the only way to stop the steal in 2024 like they did in 2020. Well, that's about all for now. So please like, share, subscribe, and leave me a comment. I'd love to get your feedback to improve my show. So I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.